The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, as always, we have the culture, the sophisticated, the artsy-fartsy Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. How do you do, sir?
Well, I do well. Artsy fartsy, that's funny. I remember the first time I ever heard anybody say that, I was like in high school, and they were being, kind of disparaging to a band that I liked and saying that they were artsy fartsy, and I was like, I think I like artsy fartsy. If that's a thing. I think I'm into it, actually.
I mean, it's funny because it doesn't mean anything. It's just two rhyming words that sound funny together. But yeah, where I come from, artsy fartsy was a compliment. It was a compliment, usually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, usually it's sort of attached to there's like a self-deprecation to it, like, oh, I'm not sophisticated enough, but that is artsy fartsy. But
is it not a reference to flatulence?
It is, but it's more, I don't know, man. I'm not here to like change my whole paradigm about what artsy fartsy meant at the time. I always thought it was a good thing. I don't have the emotional bandwidth right now on this recording to discover that, things have been different all along.
Emotional bandwidth?
No, nobody's got time for that. We're here to record a podcast.
Oh boy, yeah. Well, and record,
and we're doing it.
Shall.
Yes, we are. Presenting our own art to the world. The art of blabbing. The art of blabbing on the internet is my art, and. They say you need 10,000 hours to master a skill or something, and I believe this may be the one thing I may be actually approaching the 10,000 hours at. Believe it or not, listener, this is what 10,000 hours of podcasting gets you this. So. It's not for everyone.
Oh, boy. I'm doing the math real quick on that. 10,000 divided by 8. That's, if it's 8-hour workdays, that's 1,250 workdays.
Yeah, work days, which is 3 years straight. And I've been podcasting for just about 10 years now. Which kind of seems to track. I don't know. Again, Chris, this show is about art. It's not about math. Save it for the mathematics in the Bible series.
Oh, yeah. When we get Dr. Lennox on, that will be fun.
Yeah. And anywho, let's get into it. Yes, folks, here it is. We had the inspiration to do sort of a little mini series. Oftentimes, mini series grow into regular sized series, and so we'll see what happens. But yeah, we have spent so much time talking to academics and scholars and philosophers and authors and lawyers and all types of learned, degreed, certified individuals. But we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking to artists, people who took the road less traveled, man. They just, they create things. They create emotions and aesthetics and, I don't know what art actually means, but we'll certainly get into that. But whatever you use to describe art, that's what we're going to be talking about. Artists, not about, talking to. We're going to be spending a few episodes talking to artists of various ilks, and hopefully about similar things that we talk about with the learned folk, So it's now, of course, learned folk can be artists too. Anybody can be an artist, much like how anybody can be a theologian. That's our, one of our sort of guiding principles on this show. And so, I'm excited. It'll be a little bit different for the next few episodes, but chock-a-block full of exciting exploration of God and theology, society, and scandal.
Yes.
Well, there's 3 minutes straight of me talking, Chris. Do you have anything to say?
Well, I was going to, you usually provide for us the Merriam-Webster's gloss of a word, but I thought maybe perhaps this time I would.
Look at you putting your PhD degree to work here.
Hey, you're training me. You're training me. I'm learning the skills.
Now remember, you
got
to do it in the middle school book report voice, or else it doesn't count.
Oh no! Oh no! I don't think I can do that.
You don't think you can do that? Okay.
It's turning into like a mini, little segment on the show. The Merriam-Webster's
great
kind of take.
Where's our paycheck, Merriam?
Yeah. Or Webster, either one of you.
Or Webster. We need to start, mixing it up from our sources here. I'll head over to Urban Dictionary.
Oh boy, can't wait to hear. From the, I forget exactly how you described them last time, the propaganda outlet or something, Merriam-Webster, they define art as the conscious use of skill and creative imagination, especially in the production of aesthetic objects.
Okay, that's pretty, seems thorough. Thorough, coming from a tool of the state, the social engineering propaganda center of defining terms and words, which of course language creates our reality. So Merriam-Webster is some sort of den of wizards that are focused and paid to define reality around us, and oftentimes redefine it depending on the will of their overlords. But that's for another podcast.
Do you think they're doing blood sacrifice there too?
Sounds
pretty intense.
Well, now you're getting me into it. Okay, so in the esoteric schools, the god Thoth came down and revealed to humankind the first form of magic, and that first form of magic was the written word, and ever since, the written word has been used to redefine reality around the minds of men in order to subjugate them to the powers that wish to oppress and use them for their own gain. But that's for something else. That's another time.
Was that straight off the dome there, or did you? Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Oh, don't even get me started on how the legal system and lawyers are more akin to some sort of arcane coven of magicians who use the written word and the legal system to express their will and change reality to their... Again, I'm sorry. I can keep going, but
we're getting slightly off topic.
We're talking about art right now.
Yes. So it is, the conscious use of skill or creative imagination to produce something, some kind of representation of something else, and of course, all different kinds of mediums and outlets, and has a very broad range, and kind of as you were saying, that anybody can be an artist. You think usually when you're thinking about art of things like painting, and perhaps sculpture and even architecture and music and and those sorts of things. And those are definitely, sorts of traditional forms of art, but it can be, I think expression, as it's talking about, using, your creative imagination. It can be done in a lot of different ways. And of course, writing poetry and even, storytelling and all of those sorts of things. So the opportunities in front of us to look at this topic are extremely broad. But what is going to kind of center all of them together is that we're going to be talking to Christians. We're going to be talking to people who are believers, people who are strong in their faith, and who incorporate their faith and who incorporate a biblical worldview into the process of art.
Well, let's not set up any unrealistic expectations, Chris. We might sneak a heretic or two in there. Because you just gotta know what's going on in the minds. And I'm excited. Now, to be clear, we have recorded a couple interviews with artists, and I do want to, this may be a correction or it may be an additive there to you here, Dr. Chris, which is we do not explicitly talk about art. Our artist mini-series is not explicitly or exclusively an exploration of art, but it is an exploration of all things, as we tend to do on this show, through the mind and the perspective of an artist, which I think that's a little bit more accurate as to what we have experienced so far and can experience in the future. Surely there will be talk about art, but there will be talk about all sorts of things. But this time, we're getting it through the mind and the mouths of artists, as opposed to somebody with a very high degree. Although people with very high degrees can also be artists. Maybe we should get somebody with a master's in fine arts to mix the two worlds. Whoa.
I actually know a few, so...
Okay, look at you.
I can make that happen.
Okay. Well, I think that would be beneficial to everybody. I do want to say before we get started, well, I guess we are already started. I did look up art on urbandictionary.com. And don't worry, folks, unlike literally every other definition on Urban Dictionary, this definition is G-rated. And will not, no earmuffs needed for this. According to Urban Dictionary, art is defined as thus. The true meaning of art is an understanding that there is something more than what is physically represented. What that is left to the audience to determine/describe. Art is a form of scribe. A scribe is a message in which the meaning is told to you by the author. However, in art scribe, the message is told by the audience, and thus there can be infinite interpretations. Quote, a magician never reveals his secrets. Here we go, Chris. What was I telling you? Magic and illusion is an art form where this understanding has been honored and protected, because once they reveal the trick, the message, there will be nothing left for the audience to believe. Behind each hill, there is something. Behind the lyrics, there is a deeper story hidden in the beats. Behind the illusions, the intricate magical things that make the world. Somebody really went for it on this Urban Dictionary.
I have
definition.
to say, I don't know who that was. It's pretty well done, but I would disagree with certain aspects of it, particularly as doing some time travel. And as you said, we've already had a couple interviews, and we're recording this kind of introductory episode before we air some of those interviews. But I think that there is certainly this elusiveness to art and to artists, and sometimes an artist creates something and they say it means whatever you want it to mean. But I think that there are other times where
cop out.
It means something very specific and something very particular into that artist. They were thinking about and meditating on something when they were creating it. And in that definition there, I don't remember exactly how they said it, but when you reveal the secret or when you reveal the meaning, then, a person loses interest. But I have always found that when I can connect with the artist, whatever the medium is, a song, a painting, whatever it is, and I know what they were thinking and what they were trying to communicate, it actually helps me to connect to an even greater level. So, this is all, art, what could be taken away from that is that it is very subjective. It is very much, up for interpretation. And I'm offering my own interpretation. I think it's in contrast to that one. But, it's one of the things that is so beautiful and so wonderful about art is that people appreciate it in so many different ways, and it evokes so much from people. Sometimes very strong emotions, whether those are positive or negative. People see things sometimes that are hailed by others as art, and they'll scoff and say, that's not art, and whether that's music, you can, just look to some of the older generations and play them some of your favorite music, and they'll be like, this sounds like trash, and you're saying, this is beautiful and wonderful, how can you miss this? Same thing with some paintings, and you have, I can't remember the artist, but he's famous for doing those, just a single red line down a canvas, and there it is, here's your art, and people, gasp over it and think it's incredible, and others are like, that's ridiculous, I don't understand. And then anything from whatever, different kinds of performance arts and things like that, and interesting pieces with jars containing whatever, even feces and things like that people are presenting as art, and then everybody...
Quite a specific pull there.
Well, yeah, that was a thing that happened that somebody presented somewhere. There's another one where somebody took a portrait, I think, of the Virgin Mary and put it in a container full of human urine, and they said, this is art. And some people thought it was wonderful, and other people thought it was disgusting. And to a certain extent, I think that is perhaps the purpose of the artist, is to evoke some kind of response. You're going to be getting a response out of people, and that's kind of...
Purpose of the artist. That's a very interesting phrase. We might need to make our way back to that phrase. I'm going to write it down here. Purpose.
Oh, go right for
artist.
it.
No, I need to let it simmer for a little bit. Well, I enjoy you describing your feelings about art, Chris. But here's the real question, is what do you think about artists? Artists, art, blah, boring. Artists, the creators, the progenitors of art, I guess. And do you have any artistic proclivities? Anybody in your family consider themselves, or you consider them an artist? Have you had any interaction with the artist cultural motif? It's one of those things where kind of as you had mentioned here just at the beginning, that we kind of believe and understand that everybody, is a theologian, that everybody has ideas about God, and everybody thinks about these things, and wherever that is, however far you take that, to whatever extent, it's there, and it is, a part of your life. And there are some people who take and devote their whole lives to that particular discipline. So there's a broad scale. I think that in the same way, kind of as you said, everybody is an artist. Everybody has some kind of expression of themselves, that they can use in different mediums. And I see it it's hard to think of anybody that I know well that I wouldn't say has a particular medium, if you will, of the expression of who they are, that when you're looking at it, it is artistic. My older brother, for example, he's a laborer. He works with his hands. He's a tradesman, and we did a bathroom renovation here at my house not too long ago, and we gutted the entire bathroom all the way down to the studs, and he came in and he's working, and I'm just kind of standing back because I
couldn't have done any of this, on my own. I'm helping him and assisting him in everything he's doing. But you could see the art in what he's doing. It's very calculated. He's very intentional. He's thinking about the aesthetic of how this is going to look. If we put this wall here, do you want this fixture here? These sorts of things. And there was something very artistic about it. But, you might look back at it. Somebody might stand back and think it's kind of brutish and there's nothing really too beautiful about it. But I was kind of able to see, man, he is an artist here in what he's doing at his craft. So yes, I think everybody is there. But when we talk more specifically about
well, hold on, don't go too far, because I would like to actually push back on a little bit, and only for the sake of conversation, and perhaps my mind will be changed. Because you're talking about a tradesman, a craftsman. And again, certainly a tradesman and a craftsman can be an artist. But there are ways to be a tradesman and a craftsman that perhaps do not define the person as an artist. Certainly we are all children of God, and because of that, as creations, we are given the creative capacity. When I think of an artist versus someone who is very talented in other ways, the thing that really stands out to me is vision. When I think of an artist versus some other talented person, an artist has a vision of a specific blueprint in their minds that they wish to sort of manifest in different ways.
It's so funny that you just used blueprint as you're contrasting an artist to a tradesman.
Well, and
follow blueprints.
Well, exactly, and there you go, blueprints. Because any craftsman can take someone else's blueprint and create, follow the plan and create something. I think that's what defines a true tradesman. And by the way, I think there's sort of an instant sort of socially constructed hierarchy between artist and tradesman. I think some artists can be tradesmen, and those artists have the technical capacity to create the thing that they envision. I think some tradesmen are artists, where they have the technical capacity and the vision by which to work off of. But there are certainly people who have vision who are unable to, they don't have the ability yet, whether through talent or through practice, to sort of manifest that vision. And when I use manifest in sort of a clinical way, just make it become a physical reality. And there are some tradesmen who, don't necessarily feel the need to have their own vision, to execute somebody else's vision. Is also, again, a very an expert skill to be able to execute somebody else's vision. But I think there's a separation between the artist and the tradesman in that case. And maybe tradesman is not the right word. Maybe craftsman, maybe artisan. I think that's the word, actually. Artisan is more of like the tradesman version of artist. You know what I mean? Are these distinctions making sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it sounds to me like what you're referring to is kind of a distinction, yes, between skill at a given thing and then creativity or expression. And that, as you were saying, if a person...
More like, I put it in vision and execution. That's what I will separate. Okay. Vision and execution.
So going back to just the specific example I was using of, my brother and working on the bathroom here. And of course I'm not taking any offense to your
and of course whatever. I was not
neither will he.
And I was not pushing back towards anything having to do with your brother.
Yeah.
Your brother may well have the vision and the execution.
Well, and that exactly was exactly what I was thinking. That was part of the process as I was watching him. He had a vision for it, and then there was a particular, execution that came along with it. And I mean, not to get too artsy fartsy, but there was even almost a certain poetry to the whole thing as you're kind of watching it all take shape. And it was the question you had, initially asked is am I in, the company of artists? And my point there was, and we can talk about where art begins and ends, and I think that's kind of what we were just getting at. But I can see it in most places through the expression of most people. And it was actually, when you go to that Merriam-Webster's, and we were talking a little bit before the show about it, that definition that I read was the fourth one. Before that, you have skill acquired by experience, study, or observation is one definition of art. You have a branch of learning, another one, like liberal arts or something like that, they're going to say is a definition of art. And then an occupation requiring knowledge or skill is also an art. So it can be understood in a bunch of different ways. But I think if you just throw it out there and ask a person what is art, and in those terms, or what is an artist, then we have a particular, a more specific kind of niche group of people and their kind of productions that people are going to be thinking about. And in that particular group, I also, happen to know and have, lived life with and shared experiences with a bunch of people that I would say, as their profession, as their full-time occupation, the thing that they are doing is creating art. And yes, I know many of them, and I think initially you had asked about those kinds of people and their minds, and that really is kind of the thrust of this whole mini-series. But I would say, or perhaps series, I would say that as a whole, they tend to be quite eclectic people. They tend to be, very interesting folks, which is one of the reasons that we want to go out of our way to talk to them. They tend to see the world through a very unique perspective, and kind of have interesting, even the way they handle their relationships and the way that they go about their own personal lives and things like that are very, very different and very interesting, kind of obscure in some ways sometimes. And that is one of the things I think that makes an artist who they are, that they have this interesting perspective. They have this interesting way of seeing the world, of relating to the world. And sometimes it's difficult for them to do that in what we might call a normal, quote unquote, way. So their means of coping with that, or their means of expressing themselves to their friends and to their family and to the world around them, comes out through this particular medium, whatever skill it is that they have, whether that be music or painting or sculpture or performance arts or anything like that. They kind of express who they are to the people around them through these mediums, because they can't do it in other ways.
Yeah, can't or don't feel that they are sufficiently able to articulate what they're... you're right. I think that's a big part of it. Art, in a way, is a very special kind of communication, a very special kind of articulation, oftentimes of things that are deeper than what one can put into words. Now,
and I was just thinking, I'm gonna let you run with it,
Sure.
but I was just thinking too that it's not even just an expression sometimes of yourself, but sometimes it's also of ideas. Sometimes they're having these big ideas and concepts and things like that. Yeah. So
well, I think that's exactly right. I think that's one thing about art. And again, I am trying to focus more on artists. So when I'm not trying to figure out what art is, I'm more trying to understand the artist. But, if we consider art as a specific type of communication, an articulation of ideas that in some ways may be too big for articulation. There are some ideas that cannot be fully articulated with words, but they can only be felt, I often experience this feeling in spiritual ways. I mean, I think spirituality and God is one genre of thought that often cannot be fully articulated in language, especially a language as limited as English. And using art, or defining art rather, I almost don't even want to use art as a fully defined noun. It's now that we're talking about it, and in the context of what I'm trying to articulate, it's almost like I need a piece of art to describe what I think about art. It's like it's too much. It's a way of communicating an idea or a feeling or a concept or a collection of all those things all at once in a language that cannot be translated fully into any other language and can only be spoken in the form of art and felt in the soul. Wow, that's good. I'm going to write that down.
You should submit that to Urban Dictionary.
I'm taking you down, Urban Dictionary user 216/420. So when you apply that idea to an artist, these sort of stereotype of an artist, I think, is not helpful to apply to all artists, but is a good starting point, which is they're usually a little bit quirky. There's often some difficulty in fully comprehending their intentions or or what they're saying to you. That can go all the way from sort of a, again, stereotypical, Hollywood depiction of a crazy artist who wears a big baggy button-up denim shirt with paint stains on it, with frizzy hair and big glasses, and lives alone in a red brick loft somewhere, is sort of the archetype in our culture that we've been given. But I think an artist can be defined as someone who attempts to communicate ideas that are bigger than their ability to articulate with words. And this also applies. I mean, this is one of the fun things about juxtaposing our conversations with academics and artists, because academics are very good at constructing strings of words to be as articulate as possible about an idea that they're communicating.
I was going to say, as you were going through your kind of idea of it, I was thinking about academics and research and writing and those sorts of things. Who are often
also very quirky,
Yes. So, and I was thinking that as well.
Again,
I was like,
even my attempt to precisely nail down an artist also bleeds, into the academician as well. Which is why I say, academics can also be artists, and their art form may just be different. So, again, I guess in that way, now I'm coming back around. See, I'm great at talking myself in and out of different positions, because with the description that I just valiantly attempted to lay down forever on this modern stone tablet of podcasting that will be available all over the world till the end of time, live, unedited strings of consciousness I'm spewing out here. I've convinced myself again that I think everybody can at least operate in the office of the artist, to put it in some charismatic language.
Yeah.
To operate in the office of the artist, everybody has the potential, or at least maybe express the gift of being an artist. Because everybody has these ideas, doesn't even fully encompass it, but this combination of ideas and feelings and something deep, deep, deep down that they're unable to communicate in a traditional way that needs another language. And some people are naturally talented in that language. Some people practice for years in that language in order to communicate. And others are simply sort of not interested in expressing those things, but that doesn't mean that they don't feel it, that their soul is not filled with inarticulatable things that they just let simmer and lurk below the surface. And maybe an artist is just somebody who is making a valiant attempt to communicate that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you were talking kind of about, and I agreed to a certain extent, but about the, when words fail, that's kind of when, art comes in. But then there's a whole nother expression of art that is words. And this was where, too, I started thinking, it's not just not being able to articulate what you're feeling, but there's actually, it's more kind of in the way in which you do it. And probably the only way that I have studied at a academic level art is in studying biblical poetry, unless you want to consider the entire Bible as a work of art, which some people do, and there's biblical narrative, and that's artistic, the way that stories are communicated and things like that. But again, going with that kind of more traditional idea that everybody understands of what art is, in the Bible, you have entire sections of poetry, in Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and even the book of Job being a poem. Those bits of Hebrew poetry, and it was like you were saying, where there's this, you're failing to really be able to communicate the thing that you want to say because it's bigger than you are. It's larger than life. So you have to use these other mediums, these other outlets. And in Hebrew poetry, that is one of the things that you see that happens. And in most poetry, but you have these sort of hyperbolic sorts of statements about in biblical poetry, who God is and how he operates and how he, makes himself known in the world. And the artist, a lot of times David in the Psalms is talking in these extremely exaggerated terms. And you're thinking to yourself, well, this isn't quite right. Like, you're not actually really communicating something that's true. But then as you kind of stop and look at it from a different angle, or through a different lens, you're thinking to yourself, actually, this is very true. This is kind of it's a more full expression of what the truth is than if we were to try to say this with very precise words, to use these kind of bigger, more poetic words and those sorts of things. So I was thinking, as you were going through that whole thing, I was like, what is the distinction then between a person who uses words as art? Where can we, kind of draw the line in what's art and what's not? Because again, and as you already acknowledged, I'm thinking about all of those descriptions, and I'm thinking about, there's one particular guy who I was in my program with, and he's taken a long time to write his dissertation, and he's doing it intentionally because he just wants it to be perfect when he gets done with it. So he's taken a very long time, and he's dealing with some very complex ideas that are going to really fire up some people when it gets out there. So his name is Anthony. What's up, Anthony? But he is like he's like one of those weird kind of like savant people who I don't know if this would, don't take offense, Anthony, but he's a little bit quirky. He's kind of has this, like, you would look at him, he's got that kind of mad scientist sort of thing going. He was given the nickname in our cohort Kramer, because he kind of like reminded everybody of Kramer from Seinfeld, where he's just like a little bit unhinged. Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't be entirely surprised to see him standing in front of some giant canvas and splattering paint all over the place. But his medium, his particular outlet, is through, his typed words and in the way that he organizes his ideas and then communicates those to other people. So I don't know. That was just a little bit of my response to all the things I was thinking as you were talking. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't know if there's too fine a definition that we could really put on
I think we nailed it. I think we finally settled it here on this podcast. It's just too bad that, it won't get the credit it deserves. But that's okay. Such is the life of an artist, Dr. Chris.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about why we're interested in talking to artists. These are people who spend their time, whether it's their profession or they're spending any amount of their free time to devote to the project of communicating things in a language that cannot be communicated otherwise. And, with that comes a new perspective on a lot of the things that we talk about. And we're going to be doing our best in the future here to talk to all kinds of people, whether they be sort of visual artists, musical artists. We're collecting. We're a nice little collection of artists that we'll be speaking to over the next few weeks. And I'm excited. I expect, now to be fair, we have spoken to a couple already before recording this, but there will be more. I expect a couple of things. I expect, that they will bring fresh, new perspectives, ways of thinking about God and society and scripture and things in a way that might inspire. That's one of the things about art and artists is they sort of beget one another. An artist can inspire someone into artistry, and art can inspire new art. So I'm looking forward to that. I also expect that it will be an incredibly relatable experience, precisely because those things that are deep down that we all feel and know, the things that stir in ways that we maybe don't often get to articulate or are able to articulate. I have a feeling that there will be a lot of ways to relate to that, and that things will be talked about and spoken about in ways that will resonate in perhaps a way that one of our other guests, while talented and articulate, may not have done it in the same way. So I don't know. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a fun mix. And these artsy fartsy types, folks, they'll have all sorts of interesting ways to talk about the same things that we talk about, because that is kind of an aspect of art too. It's almost like when I look at art, it's rarely something like, oh, what a brand new concept this presents to me. Instead, it's some sort of relief that I feel, because it's like, oh, what a familiar concept that I had not seen communicated
fully
well.
Realized is
or
what I'm
sure,
what I'm,
yeah,
what
perhaps
it makes me think.
Perhaps realized, or at least given some sort of language that I have not heard before, or seen, or felt, or whatever.
Yeah. And that is kind of, what is, I don't know. I had mentioned intention, I think, in a little bit ago, and you wanted to come back to that. So perhaps this is the
purpose of an artist, which I think is funny. I feel like an artist might cringe at that occasionally.
Perhaps. I know some who I think would not. I've actually heard some very interesting explanations from some artists about what the purpose of their particular work was. There's one actually that if anybody's a fan of Radiohead and their music, they have a song called it's off of Kid A. And it's called the National Anthem, and it's just this music where it just starts to, it's a little bit unnerving, and then at the end it's just this like cacophony of horns just going completely mad, and it is a little bit like it gets loud, and it's almost like this is not enjoyable to listen to. And Tom York was actually giving an interview about that, and someone asked him, what's going on with, the National Anthem? And he said, I wanted people to feel like when they were listening to that they were trapped inside of a packed elevator, and they couldn't get out. And then, very interestingly, the next song that comes after that is called How to Disappear Completely, and he's giving a picture of somebody who is trapped inside of an elevator and how they go into this place in their mind where they're able to disappear in the midst of this crowd and kind of float out of the liffey, as he calls it, the British kind of term for an elevator, and how they're able to float out of it. So you do have times, I think, and there are other, other artists. That was the first one that came to my mind that I talked to, where they do say, I'm trying to evoke this particular type of emotion, or I'm trying to evoke this particular type of experience. And that, again, when we were talking about, when people ask, like, what's the meaning of this song, or what's the meaning of this painting? And perhaps sometimes artists would cringe at such a question. I have encountered many who are quite happy to actually walk you through their thought on it, their process, how they're trying to communicate these ideas. And for me, a lot of times, you come to something and you look at it and you think, oh, this is what I think about this, and this is how this makes me feel. But then you get an explanation, and then you kind of just feel stupid because you're like, oh man, I think I missed it entirely.
Yeah.
And then it means so much more to me when I can see it as it was perhaps intended to be seen. And I know that there's a whole nother section of art where people don't have any, you're free to think whatever you want to and feel whatever you want to.
That's interesting in the context of communication, because, that mindset of like, or the difference in the mindset between asking an artist what something means and having them respond with, it's just whatever you want, this is, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And, the opportunity, contrasted with asking an artist what something means and them picking it apart, deconstructing the whole, and walking you through some sort of meaning. It is very similar to, communication with words in that way, because there are moments in my life. Now, on a podcast, I'm always happy to pick apart something I just said and go deeper and maybe take its cohesive parts, separate them, explain them, and then try to put it back together for someone. But there are times in my life, perhaps when I did not sleep well, perhaps when I've missed a meal, where I'll say something and somebody says, "What do you mean?" I'm like, I don't know how to put it any simpler. It's either you understand what I said or you don't, and we just need to move on. So I definitely understand both of those instincts.
Yeah.
And I think it's, very similar with an artist. If they're trying to communicate something, they're either excited to walk you down that path to get you there, or it's so obvious to them and so difficult to pick apart that they're just like, whatever you want, man. I can't guide you there.
Yeah.
So I, again, at least for me in this exact moment during this, hour that we are recording this podcast, I totally am orbiting. I cannot break orbit from this idea of art as a type of communication. Now, we are talking about the purpose of an artist. Mm-hmm. And again, if I'm putting myself in an artist's shoes, I could understand where perhaps the more quirky of them will be sort of obsessed with this idea. It's a existential question that I think a lot of us ask about ourselves all the time. What is my purpose? What is the purpose of my work? What is the purpose of this or that? Purpose is a very existential concept that can quickly become overwhelming with trying to, dissect or adequately categorize. And I just did a little bit of Googling, just real quick, but I have some ideas that maybe might spark some more conversation here. I have artworkarchive.com. I have no idea who they are or what their purpose is. But they have a blog post here that is, what is the artist's role in society? And I think there's some answers here that I will just run through some of the headlines and see if they make sense.
Sure.
So, in the idea of what is the purpose of an artist? Again, not art, but the artist. Artists are a vehicle for expressing universal emotion. Okay. I think that is kind of wrapped up in my rant earlier in the episode. There's some sort of universal idea being communicated that is difficult to articulate. Artists are responsible for unearthing the truth. And they go on a little bit about how there can be truth in art that maybe can't be spoken for whatever reason. Perhaps that reason might be like, as straightforward as like, the state has banned a certain type of speech. This sort of protest art where, if you're in a country or a society where it's illegal to talk about certain subjects, like, is this dictator actually the son of God? Is this dictator actually, a divine representation of God on earth? There's certain cultures over history and even now where to question that idea, to speak that out loud, will get you in a lot of trouble. But, you can hide these things in art that communicate that. And for those who have ears to hear, perhaps, can get the message. An example of this, I'm not sure if we spoke about this with Peter Rollins, but Peter Rollins has an example of some Soviet agitprop. So, agitation propaganda, the sort of Soviet-style posters of, Stalin looking very strong and mustachioed with flags waving in the background as he is sort of barrel-chested, standing straight, a depiction of Stalin as a strong leader and, supposed to inspire fealty to the state. And there's this story of this socialist, a member of the party, the Communist Party there in Russia. And his job was to create these posters to, hang up and inspire people to think of Stalin as a big, strong guy. And he would hide little clues in the poster that revealed more than he was being paid to reveal. And in one of them, he painted Stalin in the regular fashion, strong, standing up straight. But he happened to hide in the painting that Stalin had 6 fingers. And he put an extra finger on Stalin. And
is he a Nephilim?
Oh, yes. Well, that's a whole nother thing. But the sort of message was, he's not human. He's a monster. He's, he's not what we think he is. Something like that. And he hid this in this poster, and it went to print and things like this. And when it was discovered, he was executed for it, for just putting another finger on Stalin, because people were sort of face to face with the truth that Stalin was a beast. He was not human. He was, he was that. And so that's an example of sort of unearthing the truth, or communicating it in sort of a surreptitious way. Sorry, I got caught up on that. Let me keep going. Artists work to illuminate the margins that make societal changes. Okay, yeah, some more ideas being communicated. They tell stories and pass on traditions. I thought that one was kind of interesting. When you think of like the
Yeah.
importance of artists in like a historical context, the broad view of humanity, it's sort of a not all they're often thought of as like rebels against tradition or something like that. There's especially in America through the 60s and 70s, artists were sort of this class that lived a little bit of a weirder life than the normal class of people, and bohemia, the whole bohemian thing, living an alternate lifestyle, being sort of progressive in that way. But there's a long history of artists, being almost like archivists or the preservers of tradition. And I think that's very interesting, especially in like ancient times, or even places in the world now where singers and artists are like, their explicit job is to record history in songs or in art, to preserve it.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to skip a few. Some of these are a little bit esoteric here. Artists record and preserve our human history. Artists offers messages of hope. Okay. Those are the interesting ones, I guess. But definitely an attempt at discovering the purpose of an artist. And surely every artist gets to, figure out their own purpose. But as far as the archetype of an artist, they seem to play a lot of roles.
Yeah. And it was interesting as you were talking about the preservation of kind of history, and how there may be actually some kind of like, intentionality like of these artists as historians. But really, I think too, when you go into just kind of observing and looking at art and art appreciation classes, in college and those sorts of things, what you find is that people are, they are preserving history whether they want to or not, through their expressions of art. And lots of times it's a commentary on the more important kind of things that are taking place in society around them. And that is another one of the things that I'm interested to be talking with artists about is, what kinds of things are you trying to communicate, and what are the things that you're finding important that you want to kind of, offer a perspective on. And for me, being a Christian and a believer, I am most interested in hearing and seeing what Christian artists depict and what they create through their various mediums, because the thing that is kind of at the center of who I am and at the center of who every believer is the person of Jesus, the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of us, and that connection that we have to God. And it's one of those things that I, as an academic, I think a lot about these things, and then I try to convey these ideas through, the written word and through the spoken word here on this show, and those sorts of things. But it's so fascinating for me to see people who are taking these, different complex theological ideas, or even just kind of emotions that come along in your relationship with God, and putting those into different types of expression that you, as you were saying before, I have felt this before, but I've never been able to articulate it quite like that, or I've never been able to understand it quite like that. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about in going through in this series. And while, yes, we may have on some, heretic artists, and we don't have the full, guest list planned out just yet, so it's still kind of open. If you guys have any suggestions, feel free to send them in. Or if you are some kind of artist yourself and feel like you have a perspective, let us know. But I'm very interested to hear from Christians about how they express the thing that is the most important to them, their relationship with God, in the world around them, and then even how does that relate to the things that are going on. So what is the kind of historical sort of value that they are offering to the world around them in being sort of commentators on the things that are going on. And it's really exciting for me as somebody who I appreciate art. While I don't know that I have any particular outlet myself that I would call art. I appreciate all different kinds of art. And it's a really cool time right now because in the past, Christian art, and particularly music, is just the easiest one for everybody to look at. Like in the last, you go back to the 80s and even to the 90s, and it just seemed like everything that Christians were doing in the world of art, they were trying to be like the world. Like the world is creating this kind of music, or the world is creating, this type of painting or whatever. And it seemed like this weird kind of mimicry of what the world was doing, and it always kind of fell short. But what's been really interesting,
if I may, real quick, I want to share. But on the in the context of that, that is, I believe that is not to say that Christian artists were not generating their own art outside of the context of what culture was making, but remember, the most widely distributed Christian art was being distributed specifically in a commercial context. So you talk about Christian music, Christian film is a very similar sort of industry where it's like, oh man, just so many times it just falls short, just falls short of
sometimes not just falling short,
and
sometimes it's an entire crash and burn.
Yes, a great fall. But I always want to make sure to keep in mind when it comes to that Christian art, the reason that it tried so hard to fit in and didn't quite do it is because those are in commercial contexts where they're trying to compete with the secular, commercial music industry or film industry, and there's economic incentives to make something that fits into a mold and stuff like that. So for sure, always there's been incredibly talented Christian artists making incredible Christian art, but when it hits that intersection between being a piece of Christian art and trying to fit it into the secular economic system of our world, it just didn't. For so long, it just didn't quite do it. But luckily, I think what you're getting to is that, recently they seem to have figured it out a little bit better, at least in music, not quite in film yet.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with, the advent of the internet as well, and it's like people who may not have otherwise been given, an opportunity now have a platform through which they can show the whole world what they're doing.
There's distribution outside of the economic system, It's not like they have a recording company who wants to make it the most profitable music. Now they can just make it and put it out, and the people get it.
Yeah, and I think that there is something very interesting that that was the old expression, why should the devil have all the good music? And for a while it kind of seemed true that was the case, and really it should be the case that as Christians, as believers, as people who are indwelled with the Holy Spirit, and as people who are offering all of our time, talent, and treasures to the Lord, and particularly here, our talents, as we're offering those to the Lord. You're a musician, and God, I want to do this for you. I want to use these talents that you've given me for your purposes, for your glory. Then if you are being led, guided, inspired, infused by the Holy Spirit in that creative process, then Christian, quote unquote, art, and I actually kind of want to come back to that, should be the greatest. It should be the best in all avenues. We should have the best paintings and the best sculptures and the best music. And you actually do find that when you go back in history, all of these, great works of art, all of the great artists, they all were kind of connected to, in some way, shape, or form, the church, and it wasn't kind of until you get into, modernism and then postmodernism that you start to see a lot of what was mainstream kind of art moving away from sort of, orthodox, sort of Christianity and those sorts of things, and moving into these realms where it started to become, at least in popular culture, a little more kind of like on the fringes and kind of Christ and kind of anti-church, and people making these statements that were bucking those sorts of religious systems, and sometimes for very good reason. But I'm just saying that it had been in classical kind of history of art that it was Christians and it was believers, and some of the greatest pieces of art that we have still today that are preserved were created by Christian artists and, dwell inside of churches and those sorts of things. The Sistine Chapel, for crying out loud, is perhaps one of the greatest masterpieces that has ever been, created, painted in a single place. It's phenomenal, and it is a theological, communication there. So I didn't want to, that we seem to have a lull somewhere there in the maybe 70s, 80s, 90s, where it was like, what is this stuff that we're getting? But here recently, man, I am really a firm believer that some of the best art that I'm seeing produced in whatever medium that is actually coming from Christians. And it's really such an exciting time to be alive and to be a Christian and to be somebody who appreciates art, because we're getting really top-notch sorts of production from those people. So let me hand this over to you, and we can talk about this for a moment. But you said, you brought up Christian art. You might not have brought it up. I might have said it, but you were talking about it in Christian, even if we say Christian music or Christian art or whatever. And then, I have heard Christian artists or artists in general actually kind of get, in the same way that you were talking about being kind of offended or frustrated with people asking about meaning, with people being put in, these boxes of, you're a Christian artist, so why doesn't every one of your, how can you be a Christian artist? Amy Grant probably, being the most famous, where for a long time she came up, writing praise and worship music, essentially something like that. And then she puts out this album where it's like, she's talking about romance and dancing and all of these worldly sorts of things, and kind of the whole Christian community kind of starts turning on her like, what is going on? You're supposed to be a Christian artist. And she's kind of standing there like, I am a Christian artist.
Yeah, it's the concept of, are Christians allowed to make art about whatever?
Right. That is not specifically,
or does an artist have to make Christian art? It's it's the difference between Christian artist and Christian art. Well, some would say not all art made by a Christian is Christian art. But Christian art, by that logic, could be made by a non-Christian. What is the taxonomy of definition there?
Yeah. And is it fair to, put your favorite, whatever musicians and whatever, any kind of artist into, this kind of category where it's like, if you write a song and it doesn't have, it's not proclaiming the gospel in it, then, what are you doing? And I have thought kind of long and hard about this. And again, I'm not an artist, but I just think to myself, as a Christian and as a believer, and as art is an expression of something that is so personal to you, as generally when you are producing art as an artist, it is, an expression of the things that matter the most to you, of the things that are kind of in your mind and in your heart, in the realest and truest ways, then it's like the verse, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And in the same way, from the overflow of the heart, the brush paints, or whatever, the musician writes, or whatever it is. Then I have sometimes questioned, like, if you are truly a Christian, I'm not saying that every single piece of art that you produce must contain, some gospel message in it. But it does kind of cause me to scratch my head sometimes when there are people who claim to be Christians, and then in this expression of who they are, they're not manifesting any way a communication about their relationship with God. And then I just kind of wonder, I'm like, how important is that to you if it's not coming out in any of this?
I might push back a little bit on that.
Oh, yeah, feel free. This is just where I'd love to.
In the context of what you're saying, if you ask an artist what something means, if you have to ask them rather what this means, how is this Christian, or what's the Christian message in here? I mean, I would say ideally, and of course this may not be the practical truth, but to get a little high-minded about it, ideally, everything a Christian creates is an expression of their Christian experience or Christian viewpoint or whatever, so there's, at least that's the ideal that I like to consider. Even if you make a painting and it's not of Jesus on the cross or Jesus off the cross or, whatever, and you do a painting of a child riding a rocking horse or something, there may not be some sort of explicit communication of anything symbolizing a Christian experience. But it's like, how could it not? If it comes from the heart and the soul and the skill of a Christian, how could it not contain some expression of the Christian life? And I think that's a difference between, of expectation of the person. So for instance, I do a news show. My main podcast is a news podcast. And we explicitly say that it's a Christian podcast. And we oftentimes are putting things in the context of the biblical worldview or, any number of ways of describing that. And we still get pretty often people like complaining or mad or criticizing the show, being like, how come you're not talking about the gospel? I'm not hearing anything about Jesus's, death and resurrection. How is somebody supposed to get saved listening to this podcast? And it's like, well, we are Christian. We explicitly say we're Christian. And we explicitly refer to the Bible multiple times per show. But because we're not giving some sort of altar call on a news podcast, it doesn't reach some bar for some people. And I'm not saying that you are referring to, that your bar is set like those are. But, the response in my head is the whole thing is an altar call. The whole purpose, my whole life is supposed to be, at least a reflection of what the gospel message does to a person or means to a person or whatever. So even if I'm doing, a podcast about, the situation in Ukraine or something, there has to be a level at which it at least expresses the Christian experience in this world. Now, that's the ideal, that somewhere in a piece of art created by a Christian, at some level, even if it's a bit too abstract for a passerby to immediately ascertain, somewhere in there has to be just implicitly a communication of at least the Christian experience. Now, of course, there's the case to be made to help me articulate your point, which is if you claim to be a Christian artist and you paint a painting of, the devil conquering the world and all good has left and you paint yourself a little self-portrait of you worshiping the devil while he reigns over all humanity, and a little speech bubble that says, "Yay, I like this very much," then yeah, I get that that might be difficult to define as Christian art. However, depending on how abstract your interpretation wants to get, I could still figure it out, man.
Yeah, well, in that, that I think, ties back into what we were talking about intention, or purpose, if you will, in the creation of something, and then interpretation of it. And I would say it was interesting that you used that about, a person kind of kneeling down to the devil, or even call it an idol. And that kind of is to a certain extent what I was thinking about in that, where it's like, if you are I guess an artist, and if you are a Christian, then if you are leaving kind of the Lord out of all, and I'm not saying it has to be, and I'm not saying every song has to be an altar call, but it should somewhere in what you're doing, just like everything in your life, somewhere in it. And not everything I do, not every time I go out to eat, or every time I take a walk, or every conversation I have, do I use it as an opportunity to share the gospel. And perhaps I should. I mean, perhaps I should do a better job about that. But that's not my expectation for anybody. But I do have some kind of expectation that somewhere in, what it is that you're doing, who it is that you are, there's going to be an expression of that. And I wonder, sometimes if there are some folks, some people, some artists, and particularly those who have become, very popular, very successful by worldly standards, rich and wealthy, who claim to be Christians, yet you don't see that in any of the things they're producing, if they aren't actually in some kind of interpretive way kneeling down to the devil. And that's kind of, God has not given me those gifts to steward. So I don't have the gift of being a musician, so I don't have to steward that gift. So I can just kind of stand back and look. I'm not casting stones or accusing anyone or saying you should do this. It's just a curiosity that I have when I think to myself, sheesh, one of the most beautiful and artistic and poetic experiences that you've ever had in your life is when your heart, soul, mind has been transformed by the redeeming work of God, the most beautiful love story that's ever been written, and you're trying to communicate, these ideas, as we were talking about, that are very hard to communicate, and this isn't broaching into your creative outlet at all, anywhere, and it just causes me to kind of stand back and scratch my head. But again, I have not yet talked to any, artists who have left, God completely out of everything they've done. I know of some. I'm not going to name any names or call anybody out. I know of some, but I haven't had an opportunity to talk to them and actually ask them, and they might have a very, sufficient, really good answer to that. But it's just something that I think about from time to time. And I think, man, if I had the ability to write songs or to paint pictures or something, I think the only thing I would want to write a song about or paint a picture about would be Jesus. Maybe every once in a while there'd be, something else, cheeseburger or a really fast car or something. But I think most of the time.
Quite a range you have there.
Yeah, I was trying to, be inclusive, get everybody in there. But just one little hot take, and I'm certainly, leaving it open that I'm wrong.
Sure. Well, I think just to bring up, I think we're kind of coming towards the end here. I do have a couple of interesting things that I found while exploring what people were talking about on the internet about it being an artist and, specifically a believer and a Christian artist. And of course, I found such a range of ideas about that. But I found this story or this article blog from storyteam.org, which I do not know exactly what they are. but there is a blog titled God's Call to Artists. And, it starts off, what role do artists have in the mission of God? How does everyday working artist fit into God's plan for the world? It's a common question, and one of the first ones we received in the comments section of this site. It's also a question that often goes unanswered or is answered poorly. We think there is a simple answer that challenges Christian artists. Quote, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, according to the Westminster Shorter Catechism. This is clearly drawn from Scripture, where we see that God is worthy to receive glory and praise in Revelation 4:11, and that everything we do should be done for the glory of God, 1 Corinthians 10:31. Artists are no different. We are called to glorify God. But what does this really mean in practice as we pursue our work? And they go into something called the cultural mandate. And they identify the cultural mandate as the scripture in Genesis 1:28. That is the one that goes, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth. This charge given to Adam and Eve is known as the cultural mandate, which I did not know.
Yeah, that was new to me as well. We did not never came across that in my studies.
Yeah, so whether or not that's an established academic thing, or if they're just sort of referring to it as that, in this command, God stated his desire for man to not only populate the earth and care for creation, but to build and create human culture. And I found that interesting, an interesting detail, because of course we know, the mandate to take care of the earth and take care of the animals and steward creation well, but also co-create, both, with civilization and buildings and, subduing the earth while stewarding it, but co-creating human culture, because you think of building. There's building, a structure, but there's also building a community or building a culture or building a podcast or whatever. That seems to be, at least in the context of this blog here, to include art. And I think that is true, because you can't really have culture without art, whether that art is sort of used as a tool of, authority to use it in sort of oppressive ways, or a tool of humans to liberate or inspire. Human culture is something more or less intentionally created by the members within it. So you can consider artists as a type of, builder, a type of construction worker, doing their part to, lay their set of bricks in the structure that is culture. And I do think that that's there is a very impactful sort of charge in that when it comes to, God and artists and their relationship to one another. I think that's a very powerful way to think about artists. They are sort of culture builders. As opposed to, a structure builder or something. And I think artists thinking of themselves that way, it really has a very powerful sort of divine call to it, because, of course, there are good builders and there are bad builders, and there are builders who follow the plan and there are builders who don't follow the plan, and there are builders who, want to reflect one thing and builders who want to reflect another thing. And so you can consider, any artist to be someone who's participating in actively building culture, and whatever art you make, that's the influence it will have on culture. So yeah, very powerful charge there for Christian artists specifically.
Yeah, it made me think of Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory, where he says, we are the music makers and we are the dreamers of dreams. And there is a really, I think a big responsibility. Just as, all of us teachers and preachers, we consider it a big responsibility to study and accurately communicate the things of God and the Word of God to the people of God. In the same way, to every artist out there, it is a big responsibility for you to take those, gifts that the Lord has given you and to use those in such a way that would glorify Him, that would edify the church. We should all be using all of our gifts, as Paul talks about, for the edification of the church, and to be using those things in such a way that do shape the culture, and where the church then has a voice in the world, has a voice in music and in movies and in all of these different things. And we are, relevant, and we are, the creative and pioneering minds, in all that's going on. So again, that is not a skill or a talent that the Lord has given me to shepherd and that the Lord has given me to steward, but I am very excited in this series to be talking with folks who the Lord has entrusted with those skills and with those abilities.
And along the same lines there of construction, there's Exodus 31:2-5.
Yes.
The building of the tabernacle. See, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with ability and intelligence. I would say that sort of refers to the vision and execution that I was talking about earlier in the podcast, with knowledge and all craftsmanship to devise artistic design, to work in gold, silver, bronze, and in cutting stones for setting, and carving wood, to work in every craft. So again, this sort of combination between craft and art, execution, and vision, really, in the context of building the tabernacle, which I guess we could choose to allegorize to, building what God wants here on earth in general, perhaps culturally. But it took being filled with the Spirit of God. It's sort of still that God equipped, heavenly charged to do such a thing. And I'll end this with an interesting quote that I gave to you before the show here, but I'd love to read it now, which I think was very provoking, thought-provoking, and a little bit challenging, too. So, it wouldn't be an episode of Ravel without me throwing something, some sort of lit match for people to deal with. And it goes like this. This is from Dorothy Sayers, wrote this. Quote, "The church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him not to be drunk and disorderly in his leisure hours and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is this, that the very first demand that his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables."
Yeah.
Which is I find provocative, and maybe I'm being too sensitive or something, but it is sort of a classic, I don't know, maybe not critique or something, but something like that, where, the church telling you to not do lots of things,
don't touch, don't eat. Yeah.
Yes, don't do this. Come to church and don't do a bunch of stuff. Whereas this quote is challenging because it's like, forget the don'ts. What we should be principally telling our craftsmen and artists is that the very first demand on them is that they are good at what they do, that they do well, that they make good tables, which I think, has there's a very powerful idea there, where it's like the church, if it focused more on the empowerment of artists, the empowerment of people, of carpenters, of craftsmen, to display their gift in the most incredible way that they can, versus trying to control behavior, that, there may be some sort of alignment that just comes out of that. Something living fully into that gift may be more important than trying to sort of granularly control behavior. And that would just be a very interesting thing to see manifest.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of the verse in Ephesians 4:28, where Paul says, anyone who's stealing must steal no longer, but must work doing something useful with their hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. And it's kind of this, that is what I think that quote they're talking about, kind of as a first command, that when your life is redeemed, you should take the things that you have been doing, the things that you are good at, even if that's thievery, and you should, turn those things around into something that's going to be used for the glory of God, to the edification of the church, and you should be doing it at your very best. You should be doing all things as unto the Lord. And if you're a carpenter, then you're building your tables and your chairs to the very best of your ability as unto the Lord. And kind of goes back to that I was mentioning before, that Christians, we should be the best at everything. We should be the best at everything that we're doing, no matter where it is. We should be offering the best services, the best pieces of art, the best whatever literature. All of it should be the best coming from believers, and that is because we are made in the image of a creative God. He is an artistic God. All you have to do is look around at the world around you, and of course his medium is the whole of creation, and you can see the expression of his heart, his mind, his soul in the world all around us. And being made in his image, that is part of the way that he has created us to also be creative and expressive and artistic people. And we can do all of those things at our very best when we are walking in tandem, in union with him, having our minds and our hearts stayed on him, and then letting that kind of, guide and direct everything that we do. I mean, our tutor, our mentor, our trainer is the greatest artist who has ever existed. So, I think it's we should be at the top of every list anywhere. And of course it depends on who's judging the list, because if you have a bunch of secular people and worldly people judging, then we'll obviously be down at the bottom. But that again comes back around that it's all subjective. But in my opinion, we're going to have some good guests on. We're going to be exposed to some really beautiful art, and I'm just super pumped about it.
Yep, same here. It's going to be a good time, folks. So stick around, keep your eyeballs peeled, keep your ears clear, and keep an eye on that podcast player, because every Sunday for the next number of weeks, we have yet to put a limit on what this currently, what we are calling a mini-series, just talking to artists. And of course, we'll be talking about art, but we'll also be talking about whatever else comes up, getting the perspectives of artists and what they have to bring to the table, which we think and expect to be valuable and to continue to create value for anybody who has ears to hear. And you'll probably, learn about some cool new musicians and artists and whatever that you can check out yourself. So it'll be a good time. And if you have anybody who, is a talented artist and has a lot to say about all sorts of things, go ahead and send us an email, contact@ravelpodcast.com, and let us know. We'd love to at least take a look and reach out and see if they're interested.
Absolutely.
Anything left to say, Chris?
Nothing at all.
Okay. Nothing at all. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Ravel. And Chris, you mentioned that you don't consider yourself to have an artistic outlet, but I think you have one, and it can be summed up in one phrase that I look forward to every episode, and that phrase is
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
Cat just kicked in the door like Arnold Schwarzenegger.